Oh, that's okay. Just from the solar heat from the sun, you got the sun hitting one of the walls and you got that heat rising up, hitting the soffit, causing some warming on the underside of the roof decking. You can actually have icicles forming on an unheated structure. So icicles alone. All right. Icicles alone.
Everybody mute your mics, please.
All right. Icicles alone don't indicate ice dams. But if you have icicles coming out of this intersection, I hope you guys can see my cursor. You have to squint because this is very small. When you got icicles coming out of the intersection between the fascia and the soffit, that's bad news. That's how you know that you've had leakage. You've had water leaking in above on the roof. It has come down and it's showing up there. That's where the alarm sounds off. When you've got ice coming out of your soffit, that's really bad news. And that's usually pretty obvious. I got some pictures later on in this presentation where it shows what that looks like. When you've got ice coming down your wall, you definitely have a problem. And then when you've got water coming inside your house, that's usually when people actually do something about it. Usually people get the idea that ice in all these other places, it's outside the house. No. That's bad news. You want to address all that stuff, but people usually take action when they actually have water coming through their ceiling. And my advice is take action as soon as you see ice showing up in a place where it doesn't belong. And you don't always see ice dams. I mean, lack of icicles doesn't mean lack of ice dams. You can have ice dams forming much higher up on the roof. At this particular home, this is a rambler with huge overhangs, like I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 foot overhang, something like that. And there was no icicles at the edge. This is what it looks like, nice and pretty. But you get up on the roof and there's a big mass of ice here. You just couldn't see it. So this house had ice dams. It was in the early stages. I think this was the first snow of the season. But I guarantee you, once you get a bunch of nights where it's about somewhere between about 15 to 25 degrees overnight, that's kind of the prime temperature for ice dams to really start to accumulate. You get a lot colder than that, and usually it's so cold that you don't end up with melting snow. You get a lot warmer than that, and ice doesn't form at the eaves. That's kind of the magic temp, about 15 to 25 degrees overnight. I've heard it repeated so many times that gutters cause ice dams. They don't. They just happen to be located in the same place on a house. Gutters have nothing to do with ice dams. What I'm showing you here is a house with massive ice dams and no gutters. Most of these older houses have had a homeowner at some point smart enough to put gutters on their house, but they're not related. This is the way it works. Here's another diagram of my good buddy. He shows where you've got an ice dam forming right at the edge of your roof, right at the unheated section, and make note of this line right here. That's kind of that's right where the ice dam starts to form at the exterior wall. If you had a gutter onto the same house, the ice dam is not going to travel up the roof anymore. The ice dam is going to be located at the same height. You will have a much larger mass of ice that needs to be dealt with because that gutter creates a shelf for the ice to build up on top of. And I mean, it can get so bad that it can actually rip the gutters off of the house. And then it seems like, you know, it's all working in conjunction with each other. But let me stress to you, they're only happening at the same place. One does not cause the other. Don't listen to people who tell you gutters cause ice dams. Gutters are a good thing for the house. Don't listen to people who tell you that when you have leaks caused by ice dams, it's from lack of eave protection. We all know what eave protection is, right? This is not home inspection 101. This is like a 201 class, I think. It's ice and water shield. Here where I am in Minnesota, our building code requires that stuff be installed 2 feet past, or is it 3 feet? Now I'm drawing a mental blank. It's several feet past the exterior wall line. And right here, this shows, you know, this is Carson Dunlop's diagram. This may have been accurate at the time it was put out, but we need to put it past the exterior wall line. And that usually means you end up with 2 layers of the stuff installed. And it'll look like this. We've got tar paper up above here, but then down below, we got ice and water shield. And this is a first layer of defense against leaks. This does not prevent leaks. Even if you go to the manufacturer's installation instructions or their claims, they don't even tell you that it prevents leaks. Certainty, right on their site, they say provides your first line of defense. That's all it's supposed to do. And we've seen tons of leaks through homes with properly installed ice and water shield. So don't let anybody tell you that it's ice dam leaks are the result of an improper installation on the roof. Ice dams are not the problem of a roofer. Everybody calls a roofer for it, but this is not their fault. And yeah, we find this happening all the time. That's what was going on here. Ice dams can also happen much higher up on the roof where you don't even have eave protection. That's how rude. Somebody left a phone on my desk and they didn't silence it. That's what we've got going on here. You got 2 bathroom exhaust fans. These homeowners ran their fans constantly throughout the winter. So they're always melting the snow right below the bath fan exhaust, and they had a big mass of ice directly below both of their bath fans. And this was like right in the middle of the roof where you have no eave protection. So there's a lot of different ways you can end up with ice dams. It's not simply heat escaping into the attic. It can be heat directly applied to the roof decking as well. And it's for that reason, when I'm in charge, you're not going to be allowed to vent your clothes dryer out through the roof. Now, in a lot of homes, it's not going to make a difference, but in a lot of others, it's a major contributor to ice dams because you have all that melt running down, and then that ends up hitting the cold edge. So I've done a ton of ice dam inspections. There have been several winters where I would spend my entire week doing ice dam inspections. I mean, people weren't buying homes, but I got a lot of calls to do this, and I've visited a lot of houses doing troubleshooting to figure out why people end up with this. Climbing up on a lot of roofs in the dead of winter. And here's a few fun pictures. There's the icicles. May or may not be a problem. Here's the nasty brown icicles. These are the ones between the fascia and the soffit. These are the ones to really look out for. That's what tells you you've had water leaking in through the house. There's icicles coming out of a window. Yep, that means you've had water leaking down inside the wall, and now it's leaking back out. Pay attention to this stuff. And the brown, that indicates that it has run through the inside of the house. It's picked up tannins in the wood, which have stained the ice brown. This should be like a big red flag. This should be screaming at you when you see it. We've got a problem. Here's the icicles coming out of the soffits. It's not super obvious here, but there's little icicles coming out if you look really carefully. You won't need to look so carefully at this one. This has got the big icicles coming out of the soffit vents. We've also got ice coming down the wall. That's bad news. Here is one of the best pictures of an actual dam that I've ever taken. There was standing water on this roof. I took my glove and I kind of pushed down and I got my hands soaked. More icicles on the wall, ice building up on the wall. There's water, you can see where it originates from. It's leaking right out of the soffit, building up on the wall. I don't think we were inspecting this house. I think another inspector on my team shared this photo. This was just a drive-by. It was too good not to take a picture of. You think they've got some ice dam issues here? Maybe. And of course, these irregular snow melt patterns are just, we call that nature's infrared camera. Here's another example. This was maybe the best one. I was walking this roof, probably not something I do today. This was probably before I had kids when I took these pictures. I wouldn't walk an icy roof today, but I mean, I got my foot all wet. I just stepped in a big slushy mess of water on there. Here's a good example of how to not install heat cables. We will return to this one. There's more ice on the walls, more ice on the walls. This was a home where we had ice dams forming. They had just had their roof replaced about a year ago, and they went back to the roofer and said, it's your fault I had ice dams. I've been in this house for 3 years. We've never had a problem. And now, right after you replaced my roof, we've got ice dams and we got leaking. The roofer came out and tarped their entire roof in the dead of winter. It wasn't their fault. I mean, look, this is a 1.5-story home. on these houses, you have ice dams forming at the eaves, and then you have more ice dams forming right at the top of the knee wall. So there's a couple places where these form. Nice roofer. It wasn't their fault though. They had no obligation to do any of this. Here's a few infrared images from leaks caused by ice dams. You know, you guys know what all this looks like. The blue spots are wet, and these are all things where I confirm the moisture with my moisture meter. I would never take an infrared camera and scan something and simply say, oh, that's wet. I can see moisture on my camera. If you've ever been through a thermal camera class, you got to go through that before you start calling out moisture. These things need to be verified with a moisture meter. But I verified all these. These are definitely wet ceilings in the dead of winter. And it goes on. And when that water leaks in, it's going to run down the inside wall. A lot of the time, it'll hit the bottom plate of the wall, and then it'll leak back out, and it'll get your floors wet. And that's what we're seeing here. This was chronic water intrusion from ice dams. This is all wet in the dead of winter. We pulled back the carpet to find this. So you'll see signs in all kinds of areas. Here's a bathroom window where the water was dripping down. Conveniently, it drained into the tub. That was nice, you know, courteous of the ice dam to leak there. More ice dam damage, people ripping apart their walls, their ceilings, stained ceilings. Here was the same house where we had those heat cables that were improperly installed. I went up into the attic. This was a pre-listing inspection. I went up into the attic and it was raining in there. I mean, you can see the droplets suspended in the air with my camera. I mean, it's just dripping. It's pouring out of there. So I'm showing you all these photos just in case you live in an area. I mean, I know there's people from all over the US on these calls, just in case you live in an area where ice dams aren't all that bad, or you haven't had a lot of experience dealing with the damage caused by them. Destroyed gutters is the least of our worries. What we're really concerned about is roof leaks. That's the big problem that ice dams cause. And one of the things that is kind of a telltale sign in an attic that you've had leakage from ice dams is this band of frost along the exterior wall. Now, in some cases, it could be from the wall allowing moisture to escape out, and then it condenses and shows up as frost. But when it's really heavy, it's usually the result of past leaks from ice dams right there. And oh, I guess I got one quick little video clip to show you too. Isn't that nice? This is on a like a 40-degree day where everything's melting, but the water is still trapped. You've got water just pouring out of the soffit from some wicked ice dams. Okay, so we're all in agreement now. Ice dams aren't good. Ice dams cause damage. And now, how do we fix them? What causes them? There's three different things that are the major contributors. Number one is attic bypasses. That's what I've got really big here. Number two is insulation. Insulation definitely does play a role. You need insulation in your attic. And I don't know if you guys can see it. You may have to squint a little bit to see this. I did that on purpose. That's ventilation. That's the last one. That is the last thing you should ever think about when it comes to ice dams. I do have it listed here. It's part of the equation, but I'll tell you, boy, when I first started being a home inspector, all the classes I'd go through, they'd say there's two things to ice dams. It's insulation and ventilation. I would hear that just hammered into my head, and that's what I was always telling my clients, but it was not good information. Ventilation is the last thing you want to look at. But we'll talk about it briefly. And you know, Hollis said at the beginning, we're also going to talk about attic moisture. We definitely are. All of the stuff that I'm going to discuss around attic bypasses is going to be the same thing that causes moisture inside of an attic. If you want to fix your attic moisture problems, your frost issues in the attic, mold in the attic, condensation in the attic, delaminated sheathing, black stains or mold-like substances, or whatever we want to, you know, pussyfoot around and call mold, whatever we want to call it, It's all the result of moisture getting into the attic. It's all the result of attic bypasses. And for anybody who has the idea that we could fix all of this by adding more ventilation, or that it's somehow caused by lack of ventilation, I guess my question to you would be, what would be the fix in this attic? We can see that right around the roof vent, and they cut out some monster holes for these, didn't they? Right around this roof vent, you've got a small little area where there's no mold or black staining, excuse me. What would we do for the rest of the attic? Maybe put a vent every foot? I don't know, but I'll show you what this is all about. It starts with house pressures. We all probably have an idea of how stack effect works. Inside of a building, you have warm air wanting to rise. I'm careful with my words. Heat travels in all directions. Warm air rises. So as the air gets heated, it rises up and wants to leave out of the top. You always have air coming in at the bottom. You have air leaving at the top. All things being equal. Now, wind can certainly screw that up and it can change everything, but all things being equal, air wants to leave at the top. So you've always got this drive for air to leak up into the attic space. Now, if you have this thing right here, the attic lid, we'll call it, the separation between the living space and the attic space. If you have this 100% air sealed, then you got nothing to worry about. There's not going to be any warm air leaking into the attic space. We're good. And doing that will dramatically cut down on air wanting to enter in at the bottom of the house. It stops a ton of air movement going in and out of your home if you have this totally air sealed. But it's not typical to find that. Where I live in Minnesota, there was no such thing. It wasn't even a concept to air seal an attic until the early 90s. That was the first time people started to get the idea that maybe we should do something. That's not to say houses were done really well at that point. I mean, we've still got new construction homes that are being built today where people miss some of the air sealing. But at least in the early 90s, people started making attempts to do air sealing. And what we're air sealing is attic bypasses, these passageways for warm, moist air to pass into the attic. And this is what they look like. The most notorious one, the one that I'm always after first when I climb up into an attic, is the one around the furnace and water heater vent. And if this isn't sealed, nothing in the attic is going to be sealed. This is always the worst one. And usually what I end up finding is some insulation kind of pushed around the sides of it. And I'll usually go over there and I'll pull the insulation back and I'll be able to look right down this chute, right down to the basement. It is a perfect chaseway. And you know, that furnace vent gets warm. So that especially means you have a lot of air leaking right up through there into the attic. This is a heat generator. Not only that, but it's going to pump a lot of moisture from inside the house up into the attic space. Here's another example of it. This is all covered over with insulation, and you can see it's been insulated a couple times. We've got some yellow insulation and some pink insulation, and I pulled it all back. And oh, also note you got some kind of black insulation. It's not mold, it's dirt. This has been leaking warm air up into the attic space for the past 30 years, right underneath this this sheet metal collar. We've had tons of air leaking up into the attic. And what is this insulation? Fiberglass. What is a furnace filter made out of? Fiberglass, same material. It's simply been acting as an air filter for the past 30 years, and that's what's caused the insulation to turn black. Usually, when you find black insulation in a situation like this, it's a result of air leakage. It's not mold. Sometimes it can be, but it's usually air leakage. So a lot of air leaking up around this chaseway. Here's a gigantic chaseway. It was just covered over with a loose piece of fiberglass batting. I lifted it up. You could see right down. And if I were right along the side of the pipe, I could actually see down into the basement. In this case, I could just see the first floor. And of course, these are all interior walls, so none of them are going to be insulated. None of them are supposed to be insulated, and it shouldn't make any difference except when you've got a gigantic hole that, I mean, I could probably fit through this hole. This is so big. So we've got tons of warm air pumping up into the attic space here. Here's the equivalent of that. This was, I was actually looking inside of a bathtub access panel. I was checking the overflow on a bathtub, and then I happened to see a vent passing through the same space. So I stuck my camera inside the chaseway and took a picture up, and sure enough, there's insulation attempting to be an air barrier. Fiberglass insulation, trying to stop that airflow. And of course it does not. We're gonna have plenty of air leaking through there. If you have whole house fans in your area, I'll tell you, that's gonna, do you?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have a ton in my area, but when I run across them, boy, I swear, people love these things. I mean, and I wouldn't mind having one myself. I think they're awesome. The one problem with these is that there's no way to properly air seal them. And I'm using a little hyperbole. It can be done. I've just never seen it done. Every time I see one of these whole house fans, you know, this mythical insulated cover does not exist, or it's just leaky as all get out. Here's what they look like for those of you who have never seen one. You flip it up. This is an older style one. Newer ones, you might be able to seal those off, but the old school ones, you got this dial on the wall. You turn the dial and it's like a jet engine. I mean, you got this huge propeller fan that kicks on, and it sucks so hard that all those veins just flip right open, and it leaks a tremendous amount of air. I've never seen someone be able to air seal this properly. And if you're gonna find ice dam problems, you want to start by looking directly above one of these fans. They're going to be really bad there. Stairway chases are bad too. This is one where it was all covered over with boards and whatever debris they had laying around, and then they covered on top of all of that with insulation. It was at the far end of the attic, and I wasn't intending to get all the way over there, but I had my infrared camera with me, and as I'm scanning around the attic, there's this big red explosion that I can see on the attic floor telling me there's something really hot over there. So I go over there, pull stuff away, and sure enough, I mean, you can see right down, there is no attempt whatsoever made to air seal this. When you got masonry chimneys, there's supposed to be a 2-inch gap to the framing of the home, at least when you got a fireplace in there, I should say. If you got a fireplace in the masonry chimney, you need to have a 2-inch gap to the framing. So they got much more than a 2-inch gap. But then how do you air seal around that gap? The appropriate way to do it is to take sheet metal and high temperature caulking and fasten that to the chimney chase, and then caulk the heck out of all the intersections all the way around there, make it completely airtight. That would be the appropriate fix. Stuffing insulation in there does not achieve anything. And then when you have intersections between new construction and old construction, look out for attic bypasses there. When you've got electrical wires penetrating the top plates of walls, look out for bypasses there. And of course, you're not going to see any of these things. I mean, you need to take an infrared camera and scan, or you need to go around, if you don't have one of those, you go around and you start brushing insulation away in the places where you suspect attic bypasses. And it's going to be any of the penetrations. It's going to be the furnace vent, plumbing vents, top plates of walls where you could have wires and pipes penetrating, electrical boxes where you have lights. Look for bypasses there. These are all places where you're going to have air leaking up into the attic space. And I can find all of these with my infrared camera when there's a good temperature difference. If it's 10 degrees outside and I go inside an attic with my infrared camera, you can see these holes through 1.5 feet of insulation. That's how much heat is escaping into the attic through these tiny little holes. I didn't just get lucky and stick my hand right on top of the hole here. There's an attic bypass around a plumbing vent. And the fix for all of these conditions is to hire a knowledgeable insulation contractor who knows and speaks the language of air sealing and will get up in the attic space and take care of it. Probably the most common way of doing this, at least here in Minnesota, is the contractor would get up there, push all of the insulation in the attic to one side, and then they'd find all of these bypasses, they'd seal them off, they'd either use caulk or expanding foam, and they'd seal everything off. Then you push all the insulation back to the other side, you repeat, and then you add more insulation to bring it up to today's R value. The air sealing part of this is way more important than adding insulation, because if you have an attic with absolutely no insulation, but you have all of your air leaks completely sealed, you will not have frost problems. You won't have condensation, you won't have mold, you won't have any of that. You'll probably have wicked ice dams because you'll have lots of heat going up there. Actually, I take it back. You'll probably have so much heat leaking up that you won't even let snow freeze at all. But yeah, nobody wants to pay the energy penalty for that. But my point is, attic air leaks are way more important than the insulation. And then, what about
have as much if you had no insulation and air sealing? You lose some heat, but nowhere near as much as it's got.
And are there chat questions here? Because I'm not looking at them. I'm sorry.
And Sean's in charge of that. You can ignore that.
Okay.
Sean will
One
interrupt.
just came through. One just came through. That was perfect. Do you still call out older homes with holes at original electrical wiring with no signs of current or past ice damming issues?
I make note of any attic bypasses. Absolutely. Yep. Even if there are no signs of past ice damming issues, the current owner may have done something to hide all those issues. The next owner might like to have their home a lot warmer than the previous owner did. I don't know how people are going to live differently. Not only that, but this can lead to a lot of frost problems and condensation problems. So even if there's no issues at all, I'm going to get up in the attic and I'm going to find those attic bypasses, and I'm going to put a note in my report saying there's attic bypasses. This can lead to frost and moisture and ice dams. And I suggest you work with an insulation contractor to air seal your attic space. And, I'm pretty sure nobody's ever taken my advice to do that unless there was a lot of other stuff going on. They just see it as, oh, it's an energy thing. Yeah, I can wait on that. But then I can't tell you how many clients I've dealt with where they call me up 2, 3, 4, 5 years after their home inspection, and it's finally the year where they've got ice dams and there's so much snow that they end up with leaks. And they say, hey, I couldn't figure out what the deal was, but I read your report and I see right here, you told me 5 years ago I should do this or I'm gonna have problems, or I got the potential to. Well, I got problems and I'm wondering, can I hire you to come back out and give me advice on exactly how to fix it? I mean, I've never had a complaint from people, but I've had a lot of people want to hire us again because we understood the issue. So that's my long answer to that. Sorry. So
Thank you.
So I'm harping on all these tiny little air leaks, holes for wires and things like that. So how do we feel about powered attic bypasses, bathroom exhaust fans venting into the attic space? We're against them. Let's put it that way.
Hey, Reuben.
Yeah.
How do you look for attic bypasses in an attic like this one that has plenty of cellulose insulation?
I go after the most obvious ones. Like, let's say if there's a furnace vent passing through there, I'm going to climb on whatever I can to get there. Now, if I got to leave big old footprints, I'm not going to do it, but I can almost always find something close enough to the scuttle hole where I can pull some insulation away to find it. It's a rare house that I can't do that. Practice. It takes practice. So yeah, we are very against pumping warm, moist air into the attic space. So for insulation, I will touch on insulation because, I mean, bypasses are the big thing. You fix those, you're going to fix all your attic problems. You're going to fix most of your attic problems, but insulation does matter. And the three basic things that go wrong: missing insulation, not enough of it, or the wrong stuff for an attic. So for missing insulation, probably the most common thing that gets missed is when you have knee walls or transitions in height in attics, and the insulation either falls away from a wall or they completely forget to insulate it. Here's another diagram from Carson Dunlop showing showing exactly that, where they just forgot to insulate this wall. They've got a bunch of insulation here, but they didn't insulate this. And this may be an attic bypass too. If this isn't air sealed right here, well, this isn't an insulated wall, this is an interior wall. So this would not only be a bypass, but it's missing insulation. Here's a version of that where this is an interior wall you're looking at. They completely missed it. It's not that it fell down, they just never insulated this at all. And you can see I'm crawling around on here, I'm walking on the trusses. I'll do that all day if I can. Our standard of practice doesn't require us to do that. So do that if you're comfortable doing it. Same attic, they didn't insulate it all around the furnace vent. And I mean, even this attic floor section here, minimal amount of insulation. When you have bathroom exhaust fan ducts, this one was just laying on the attic floor, but the problem with this is that it's not an insulated duct. Anytime you got a bath fan or kitchen fan or clothes dryer duct passing through an unconditioned space like an attic, it needs to be insulated. If you don't insulate it, you're going to get crazy condensation occurring inside of the duct, but you're also going to radiate heat out to the rest of the attic space. So you always need to have your ducts insulated. The attic access panels need to be properly insulated too. What happens a lot of the time is builders or insulation contractors will just cut out a piece of fiberglass batting. They'll kind of make it pretty snug fit around these dams that get built up to hold the insulation back. And then somebody will do a mediocre job of kind of pulling it down behind them when they drop that attic scuttle hole cover. But a lot of the time they don't. This was an attic where it had two accesses. I crawled all the way to the other side, and this is what the attic access panel looked like. And this is what I think, probably about 75% of them look like. If you take your infrared camera and you scan attic access panels in the winter, a lot of them are going to show up really cold, and this is why. And we write that up. I mean, we put in our reports it wasn't properly insulated, and we check for weather stripping there too. This was just a fun photo I had to share with you guys. This was a house with radiant heat at the ceiling. Did you not? It had electric lines going throughout the ceiling, and that's how the entire house was heated. Only house I've ever seen like that. Yeah, and oh, wicked ice dams. You wouldn't believe how bad these ice dams were. When you have ductwork passing through an attic, if you ask me, that's just stupid. It shouldn't be done, at least not in cold climates like where I live. You're going to radiate a tremendous amount of heat through all this ductwork, and it leads to wicked ice dams again. So that's insufficient insulation there. Another place that can be really tough to insulate is at the eaves. Now, on newer homes, we have something called an energy heal truss. And that's where they change the shape of the roof. They build it way up at the eaves just for the sake of adding more insulation. That's why we call it an energy heal truss. It's an energy savings truss because you can pack that with lots of insulation. The opposite, on older homes, there was no such thing. We'd take the rafters and they'd sit right down on top of the wall at the outside. So how much room do you have for insulation here? Nothing. I mean, maybe like, 3 inches, 4 inches, maybe 5 inches, not nearly enough. And as we look carefully, you can see that insulation tapers away to just about nothing. And this is finished space right below here. So you're going to have a tremendous amount of heat reaching the roof decking right there. There's another version of it. We've got this home was re-insulated. Originally it had the pink stuff. We had, maybe 4 inches of pink loose fill fiberglass, and then they hired an insulation contractor, some insulation hack, if you ask me, to come in and add more insulation. But the insulator really couldn't get enough at the eaves, so we're left with like a solid foot where they just couldn't get more insulation at all. Do you think they solved any problems, any ice dam problems by doing this? No way. You're gonna have all the same issues. Do you think any attempt was made to air seal? Of course not. They had attic air leaks all over the place. And this is such a big deal that here in Minnesota, it's now, I'm looking at the time. I'll stop with the stories. We'll continue. I got so much more to talk about. A decent fix for this, because you're obviously not going to tear the roof off and install Energy Guild trusses. The next best thing would be to install closed cell spray foam insulation at the eaves. It's a matter of pulling back all of the existing insulation and then just really beefing it up with closed cell foam. It's going to have the highest R value per inch, and it's a decent way of retrofitting these homes. It's not a 100% cure-all, but it's the best you can do. Recessed lights are bad news, or pot lights, depending on what part of the country you're in. These things get really hot. As you can see in my infrared camera, this is insulated. It's covered with insulation. It's 42 degrees in the coldest part of the attic, 142 degrees at the coldest part, peeking through the insulation on this recessed light. There's another image of a recessed light. This was under about 18 inches of cellulose insulation. I mean, they really beefed it up. Here's yet another one. It's easy to spot these recessed lights. They kick a lot of heat into the attic space, especially the old school ones. There's two types. There's the airtight, and then there's the old school ones. And I'll tell you, even the airtight recessed lights are not airtight. They just really reduce the amount of air leakage. But the ones that don't even make an attempt to be airtight, those are the ones where you can see light spilling out of them. And that's going to be a lot of air leaking into the attic. And then you add in an incandescent bulb, and now you've got a heater with lots of air leaking out of it. Some of the worst ice dam problems I've found are on homes where we've got recessed lights all over the place. Another really challenging situation to deal with is when you've got a cathedral ceiling where you've got the recessed lights and they're just not even accessible. Here's a nice image of that from, I think this is Carson Dunlop again. And you've got the recessed light right close to the roof sheathing, and you don't have enough physical room for insulation above that. Not only that, but when you're inside an attic and you're looking at a foot of insulation, and it's a uniform foot of insulation, and then you got the recessed lights, and the insulation doesn't have this big mound over every light. It tells you might have about 5 inches of insulation over the 7-inch can lights. And those are the areas that need the most insulation. One thing that an insulation contractor could do to kind of retrofit would be to go back and build these insulated boxes and put those over all of the recessed lights. That will help. Here's my super sloppy attempt at doing one at my own house. Any professional should be laughed at for doing something like this. Usually when they build them, they look really nice, but this is a nice way of addressing it. So it's not like fiberglass, it's not like recessed lights are horrible. It's just that they need some special attention. And then I talked about the wrong type of insulation. Well, the wrong type of insulation is fiberglass bats, the stuff that comes on a roll and you roll out into an attic. They have no place in an attic.
Hey, Reuben.
Yeah.
Back to the light. There's a question. IC stands for insulation contact. Do these provide enough protection?
Yeah, if it's IC rated, you can put insulation right up against it, but that has nothing to do with air sealing or air leakage or heat transmission. All it means is that if you put insulation against it, it ain't going to start on fire. It has nothing to do with energy. The other rating you want to look for is AT. It should be like, if it's in an attic, it should be an ICAT. AT is for airtight. And again, I'm telling you, they're not literally airtight. They just make an attempt to seal off some airflow. Does that answer it, Sean? I'll assume it does.
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
So for fiberglass bats, they've got no place in an attic. The problem is that, well, number one, they're way more labor intensive to install than simply blowing insulation. Number two, they cost at least twice as much per square foot as loose fill insulation. And number three, it is impossible to install them properly, at least from my experience. I have never seen fiberglass bats properly installed in an attic space. There's always gaps. And these gaps lead to an exponential level of heat loss. If you've got fiberglass bats and you missed 2% of your attic, you're not going to have a 2% reduction in R value. It'll be like a 20% reduction in R value. It's exponential. It makes a big difference when you have all these little gaps. And this is what they look like with an infrared camera. This is what I see. I mean, this is typical stuff that you'll find in an attic. All these little gaps mean a lot of air leaking. This is just hilarious. We've got the vapor barrier on the wrong side, and I don't know what they put in their attic. It's like, I think they used some old billboard plywood or something. It was all painted and the paint was coming off. It just a big mess. And what this detail, what are we trying to do? I mean, this doesn't work. You're gonna have a lot of heat coming out of there. Fiberglass insulation, loose fill fiberglass or loose fill cellulose is pretty much the insulation of choice for attics in Minnesota. Builders use both of them. They both work just fine. The one thing is that when you get mice up there, mice, I don't know, they don't seem to affect cellulose as much, but with fiberglass, man, they will turn that stuff into Swiss cheese. And that's what you're seeing there. When you see all these dimples, all these runways everywhere, this is from mice. This is a mouse-riddled attic. Oh yeah, I got my fun little shot there. But yeah, if it's not a uniform sea, when you got all these trails, guaranteed you got a rodent problem. Either, well, I phrase it carefully. Either there's a rodent issue or there was a rodent issue. Maybe somebody has addressed it, I don't know. But the insulation has certainly been turned into Swiss cheese. And this is what it looks like with an infrared camera. You've got all these little holes all over the place. And so what do you do about that? I don't know. It depends. We put a comment in our report saying there's holes in the insulation all over. This will reduce the insulation value. It might be okay to just leave it the way that it is, but you may also end up with ice dams because of this. And your options are to leave it, or you could install new insulation on top of it, which will probably help cut down on the heat loss. Or the really dramatic thing would be to have it all removed and re-insulated, but that's probably going to be cost prohibitive. It's probably not going to be worth the money you spend to do it. The only time it would really be worth it is if you have wicked ice dams and you're really scraping for a solution here. Another example of it, yeah.
There was a comment that one of the slides had the vapor barrier the wrong side up.
Yep.
Yeah, he mentioned that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there a question about it?
I'm sorry. It was just a comment that the vapor barrier was the wrong side up.
Yeah, that is correct. It is definitely the wrong side. Did
you also cover Rockwool? How do you feel about Rockwool?
You know, I don't see a ton of Rockwool. I think it's a great product. I've read I read an article in the Journal of Light Construction where this author really felt that it outperformed just about anything out there, but I haven't personally seen enough of it to comment on. Sorry. And then what we have here is a 2 to 3 year old home. I can't remember exactly how old it was. It was a really new house. It was a really huge house, nice neighborhood, high-end stuff. This is one of those neighborhoods where they tear houses down and they rebuild them. They have horrible ice dams. You can see all the drip marks happening because they didn't air seal the attic properly. And the builder used fiberglass bats in the attic. This was a carpenter doing the work. No insulation contractor would ever pull a stunt like this. But I came up in the attic, took one peek, and I went, well, there's your problem. You got all of your ductwork running through here. The ductwork isn't even fully insulated, and you got fiberglass bats. So the bottom line is fiberglass bats don't belong in an attic. It should always be loose fill. That's the only way to insulate things properly. For ventilation, you know, I could take it or leave it. Ventilation is required by code, so let's go ahead and put it in. The idea that there's a relationship between ventilation and ice dams is that if you have a house that has no ventilation, you're going to have heat reaching the roof deck, snow's gonna melt, it's gonna run down, you're gonna get an ice dam. But if you have good ventilation, you're gonna have all this cold air passing through the attic. And instead of having a 45-degree attic, you might have a 30-degree attic. And it's gonna keep your attic so cool that you're not gonna have ice dams forming. That's the idea behind this. And so, you know, that's why I used to preach this. But what actually happens when we got a bunch of ventilation? Here's what an infrared camera shows. You have these soffit vents, you have the chutes. These are old cardboard tubes, actually. They're not chutes. And the cold air falls along the attic floor, and that's where it likes to stay. It has no desire to pass through and rise up and cool the underside of the roof decking. It just means that when you have attic bypasses, you have air being exchanged a little bit faster. So I've seen horrible ice dam problems on houses with tons of ventilation, and I've seen the opposite. I've seen homes with very little ventilation and they didn't have any ice dams. Ventilation is not the cure. It's just something that you're supposed to have in the attic. And I'll tell you, ventilation is almost an excuse for poor attic air sealing. Whenever people are talking about moisture and frost in the attic, they say, oh, put more ventilation in. If you had a properly air sealed attic, you wouldn't have these moisture issues. So ventilation doesn't fix it. And I'm sure you guys have heard the opposite. So instead of it just coming from me, I have a couple of authoritative references here. Number one, the Minnesota Department of Commerce, and they are consumer advocates. They have laws about what insulation contractors can do when they're coming out to add insulation. They say adding roof vents, including powered vents, will not eliminate ice dams and often makes the problem worse. And then let's see what the University of Minnesota says. They say mechanical attic ventilation is not a recommended solution. It can create other attic moisture problems and may cause undesirable negative pressure in the home. So they don't like the powered vents especially. And powered vents have no place in an attic, period. When you have a powered vent, it's gonna pull air into the attic space. Where does the air come from? Well, the idea is it's gonna pull it through soffit vents and other openings to the attic. But when you have a problem in your attic, I guarantee you're gonna have attic bypasses. So what happens when you put that fan in? You're pulling way more air into the attic from the house through your attic bypasses. And that's why they say it can actually make the problems worse. So I never recommend installing the powered fans. So what do you do about 1.5-story homes? Those are a real challenge. I mean, you can appreciate how you need more insulation and all that stuff, but how do you do it? Because you've got, say, 2x4 rafters, and so that's going to be 3.5 inches thick. What do we do with that? I mean, do we put 2 inches of insulation in there and then have a little 1 to 1.5 inch air gap for ventilation? Do we do a hot roof where we pack the whole space full of insulation? I don't know. I can tell you, no matter what option you choose out of what I'm giving you here, you're still going to have ice dams. It doesn't matter what you choose out of all those things. It's not going to completely fix it because of this portion here, because of what we call the slant wall. You just don't have enough room. Not only that, but it's really difficult to fix the attic air leaks on 1.5-story homes, because underneath that knee wall is going to be sitting on top of floor joists that go all the way across here. And there's a transition from the conditioned space to the unconditioned space right below this knee wall, and there's nothing there. It's a wide open space. And there is never air sealing at this location unless you've hired an insulation contractor to come in and retrofit it. And if they do, they need to access every single one of these joist cavities. They need to take a fiberglass bat and stuff it in there to act as a backing. And then they take spray foam insulation and they foam the heck out of that thing to make it airtight. And they got to do that on every single joist cavity. If you don't do that, you're going to have a lot of warm, moist air leaking up into the attic space, causing roof melt right at this location. So 1.5-story homes are challenging. I used to have a 1.5 story house. This was my remodel. I had an insulation contractor convince me, this is probably about 13, 14 years ago. I didn't know then what I know now. I had an insulation contractor convince me that if I did closed cell spray foam on the whole attic deck, that I would be able to lick my ice dams, and that would do it. So we did it, and first time it snowed, you could see clearly where every rafter was on the roof because there was no snow there. The snow would melt at all of the rafters first, and that's where ice dams would form. It doesn't work. Take my word for it. If you were to make this work, you would have to stop the thermal bridging. Wood is a horrible insulator. If you want to get this right, you'd have to have another layer of insulation covering all of the wood, maybe another 1 to 2 inches of rigid foam boards covering the whole attic space, and then you apply your drywall to that. That probably would have fixed it. Wish I would have known then what I know now.
Hey,
So,
Reuben.
yeah.
How about adding another coat of paint on the ceiling and caulking the ceiling wall joints below the attic area?
I don't think that's going to do anything. You're going to have all of the other attic bypasses. I wouldn't focus any of my efforts there. So if you have clients who are buying a 1.5 story home, what do you tell them? Well, usually you can look up and down the road and see that they're all 1.5 story homes, or they're all a similar age. You can tell them you're probably going to have ice dams, and you should probably do what all the rest of your neighbors do and get the snow off of your roof. You can hire a company to come out and shovel it off. You could get a roof rake. If you live in heavy snow areas, you know what these things are. You've seen them before. It's a thing that you use to pull snow off your roof. This is my old house. That's me doing it at my old house. This is very effective. As long as there's no snow, you're not going to have ice dams. The trick is you got to get out there and you got to do it right away. You can't let it sit for a couple of days because the ice will have set in by that point. But that's a good thing to tell your clients. Tell them to buy a roof rake, and tell them if you are going to remove the snow, remove it as high as you possibly can. If you just go up a couple of feet, when you get some really cold weather, you can actually have a second ice dam forming up above where you stopped raking your roof. And this happens because the snow acts like an insulator, and it'll make that area much colder. So the trick there is get as high as you can. I wouldn't do what this guy's doing. We've seen people, get on ladders to try to get way up there. When you got a 2-story home, I basically say it's impractical to pull the snow off. This guy's never going to be able to get high enough to make a good impact there. And so there's a lot of homes where either due to the configuration or the proximity to the home next door, it doesn't give you the right angle of attack, or maybe the people living there just don't have the physical means to rake their roof. When you have situations like that, and you're not going to fix it right away by doing attic air sealing or more insulation, you're not going to fix it the right ways. Heat cables are effective. There have been many situations where I have recommended these. It's always the last option, but it does work. But they got to be installed properly. And this is what the heat cable packaging looks like. It looks all super pretty and nice. This is what it looks like when people install it improperly. And the problem here is that the manufacturers say that you need to loop those heat cables up 1 foot past the exterior wall line. And I just remembered the ice and water shield. Our requirement is 24 inches. That's for certain. It came back to me. For the heat cables, they got to go 1 foot past the exterior wall line. They got to be zigzagged. They got to go in the gutter, the downspout extension, and 12 feet up the valleys. So a small little 15-foot section of roof could easily require 60 feet of heat cable. This is kind of a typical installation we'll see where people just haphazardly throw them all over the place. Now, besides being super goofy and sloppy, there's a defect here going on, and it's that the cable is passing over itself. And this is I recently learned about this in the last year. There's two different types of heat cables out there. There's constant wattage and there's self-regulating. Pretty much everything you see is going to be constant wattage. That's the thin stuff. It's got about the thickness of coaxial cable that you use for, like a cable or an antenna for your TV. It's about the same diameter as that, super thin stuff. The self-regulating stuff is much thicker. It's more like the thickness of Romex or NM cable. And it costs way more. You're never going to find it at a big box retailer. Here's a couple of examples. A coil of the constant wattage here and the self-regulating here. With the constant wattage, the manufacturers have a ton of requirements that you need to follow. And I was actually surprised when I sat down and read all this. I mean, for instance, you can't use constant wattage on metal roofs, rubber, wood, flat roofs, all different kinds of roofs. It can never overlap or touch itself at any point. The problem is that it gets too hot and it can burn out, overheat, or start on fire. I'm not going to read all the rest of these limitations, but it's crazy how many limitations there are. It makes you never want to buy that stuff that everybody loves to get. And then here's a quick look at the difference in the cable itself. This is the constant wattage. This is self-regulating. And real quick, constant wattage means when you plug it in, it's gonna try to get to a certain temperature all throughout the entire cable, and it stays that way. With self-regulating, it goes beyond what I can even teach to explain how this works, but it stays at the same temperature. If some portions are insulated and covered, it will get up to the right temperature. If some portions are exposed, it'll work harder to get to the right temperature. It's amazing stuff, but it costs way more money, and typically the only way you're going to get it is if you have it professionally installed. If you'd like more information about it, you can follow this link. I did a 3-part blog post series on different heat cables, and I had the IceDam guy on my podcast, and we talked about it extensively. There's a lot to know about heat cables. And then as far as IceDam removal goes, if you're going to talk to your clients about getting their IceDams removed, the only way to go is to hire a professional to steam them off. And this is what it looks like when they're steaming them. There's a lot of companies out there that use high temperature pressure washers, and they claim that it's steam. Sometimes they can actually approach the temperature of boiling water, but it's never actually steam. They all are going to have a nozzle on them, and if they let go of the nozzle, it's going to explode. That's a trigger. It's going to have a trigger on the handle, and if they let go of the trigger, it would explode. That's how you know for certain. I'll turn this down. Look at this guy. He's steaming a roof. Note what he's wearing. He's wearing a sweatshirt, jeans. Look at what's coming off the roof. Steam. That's it. That's a good professional doing it. This is not a professional. I actually found this on a company's website. They claim to be steam professionals. This guy ain't steaming the roof. Look at what he's wearing. Oh, where'd it go? Look at what this guy's wearing. He's wearing full rain gear, and he's holding a high temp pressure washer. He's going to town to remove these IceDams. This is what the roof is going to look like when he's done with it. That's a great way to tear up your shingles. So if you're going to be given any type of advice about removing IceDams, always tell people, find someone who uses true steam. That's it, not a high temp pressure washer. And then as far as removing IceDams, we'll power through this in 2 minutes here. How do you remove IceDams? Well, there's a lot of people who like the salt-filled pantyhose method. It doesn't actually remove your IceDam. The idea is you melt channels through the IceDam. Back when I used to live in a really IceDam prone area, all my neighbors had them. So I tested a bunch of methods on my neighbors' houses. The salt-filled pantyhose maybe kinda eventually would work, but if you're gonna do something crazy like that, just dump a bunch of salt on your roof, and that'll cut holes in your IceDam for water to leak through. I'm not advocating this. I'm just telling you, if you're gonna do something crazy, do that. An axe is a great way to put really big holes in your roof. Don't go near your roof with an axe, but I've seen countless people doing it. Ice pick will put lots of small holes in your roof. These ice melt tablets, they show in the picture. Don't you love this? It's like it says tossed 1 tablet for every square foot of problem area, and it's all pretty like this. I'll tell you, my tablet tossing skills are strong, yet this is what it looked like when I tried to do what they showed in the picture. They just go wherever they want. So I got up there and I put them all over the place. I put them exactly like the picture. I went nuts. I went every like 3 inches, and this is what happens. Melts a bunch of holes, and then eventually the holes fill in as water melts again, and then they fill up. So these things, worthless. And then finally, with heat cables are a preventative measure. They're not meant to melt through ice dams. They're meant to prevent ice dams. You don't use these to melt ice dams off, but that's what this person was doing. I've seen people do it. Okay, that's it. Day 15, Hollis, boom. If you want to find me, you can visit my website, structuretech.com. We also do a blog. If you go anywhere, we do a podcast. We do a podcast. Go anywhere, find podcasts are found, and type in Structure Talk. You can find our blog, and that's it. I'll stick around for any questions.
Hey, Reuben. Following up on the painting and caulking on the ceilings, what about if you do not have any obvious air leakage into the attic, such as lights or chimneys, chases, and other penetrations, but still have obvious moisture intrusion issues in the attic, black rot on the roof sheathing, etc.? That's the question.
John, are we good?
Am I falling apart?
No, shut. I turned my volume down when I did the pressure washer thing, and I didn't realize my speaker was off. So sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay, so let me do it again. Back to the painting and caulking on the ceilings. What about if you do not have any obvious air leakage into the attic, such as can lights or chimney chases or other penetrations, but still have obvious moisture intrusions in the attic, like black rot on the roof sheathing, etc.? Could that painting and caulking help?
If it's just drywall, surely not. No, it's not going to be vapor diffusion. It's going to be actual leaks. I'd say if you have what you're describing, get up there with an infrared camera on a really cold day, and you will find the attic air leaks.
Yeah, I agree. You got to figure out where that water's coming from. It's not coming through the cracks in the drywall.
Nope. Now the one exception there would be if you have a home where you've got the wood boards on the ceiling, like the tongue and groove boards, forget it. There's no hope for you. You're gonna have crazy moisture problems in your attic until you tear all of it down and do something else. I've never seen a home with that type of ceiling that didn't have moisture problems.
Is that it, Sean?
Yes.
Oh,
A
okay.
bunch of thank yous. Thank you. Great job, Reuben.
So, Reuben, I'm going to ask you to do us a favor. A couple of people showed up late because we started early. Some people, I think, realized, expected us to start at 8:30.
Sure.
And showed up late. And besides, if you recall, I turned on the recording a little bit late. So, do you mind going back to the very first slide and explain to the people who missed it what in the world is an ice dam?
Sure. Be happy to.
Just tell us, what is an ice dam?
An ice dam is a chunk of ice that forms at the edge of a roof, and it's caused by a whole bunch of snow on your roof, and you end up having heat that reaches the underside of that snow and it melts it underneath, and then you have water that runs down, it reaches the edge where all of a sudden you don't have heat because you got a cold outside wall, and then you have ice that starts to accumulate there. And as it accumulates and accumulates and you get more and more, eventually you end up with a literal dam of ice that traps water. And if it's just a tiny bit, no big deal. But when you have enough water sitting on a sloped roof, you're going to have water leaking through. And that's the big problem.